What's up, fam? I'm watching a baby here strapped to my chest. She's very interested in my phone. I figured I would just do a space because I haven't done one in a bit, and I'm watching the baby, and she likes to hear me talk, believe it or not. So I can talk instead of just being silent and trying to read stuff in between watching a baby. So I figured I would just hold this space, and if anyone wanted to come on and say stuff, I've been, I guess, debating with like two people today, and just feel like this ends up being more efficient if we just do it on a space form. To think of to sum up the two things, there's one guy who's just calling me a heretic or whatever, pretty standard. He has like a Russia flag. I imagine he's like an internet Orthodox convert who believes that the sum of faith is when you go to a priest and tell them to order you around, and then you just obey your ecclesiastical authorities, and that's all you need to do is show up, um, pay your tithes, etc. Very common sort of belief as like a way of distinguishing in their sense what is real and what is authentic from what's inauthentic. It's authentic when you are a member of the fandom and the club and you show up and you do what you're told. That's authentic worship, is when you go to church. You got to go to church, etc. These people worship their churches, their whited sepulchres, as Jesus would call them. But they can't see the kind of ironies of history and the history of the church unfolding. They like truly believe in like this type of institutional apostolic succession, where just being a member of a church is like what saves you. Like you're on the rolls, you got confirmed there, you did your rituals, and that's your salvation. To me, this is just pure paganism, and it's full replete with pagan metaphysics and philosophy and all of the rest of the shit that comes along with paganism. Usually at the very deep, deep bottom of this, I mean, I got to the point of this guy saying that the New Testament denies the Tetragrammaton, which is, I believe, like pretty even heresy in whatever church he tends to subscribe to. Generally, these people, they say this because they don't know that much about their own faith in the sense of having read the scriptures at all. So they go, yeah, you're not smart. You're like a suit. Go do that. They're literally the same as like the people who talk about pretentiousness and how if you're not an institutionally certified authority on something, then you have no right to speak on it. And if you do speak on it, then it's by nature, by the nature of your position, evil or wrong or misguided or whatever. It's like, oh, you talk about Marxism. Do you even have a PhD in Marxism? It's like, well, no, but I've read Marx, and I feel this way when I talk to Christians, and they go like, oh, well, why don't you just go to the priest and ask? And it's like, okay, I have. I've talked to a ton of priests, and it's not like they have all the answers to these things. I exhausted a lot of them with my questioning, so I just turned to the text itself, and I've found no issues with just reading things for myself. Same thing with Marx. Same thing with the Bible. Same thing with anything. There's really nothing that substitutes for. Hey there, baby. There's really nothing that substitutes for the actual experience of reality itself, in the sense of like, you can talk about Marx all day, but if you haven't read Marx, like, what's the fucking point of talking about it? You should just go read it. And the only really like interesting conversations you could have about it is with someone who's actually read it, and then you're actually talking about the same thing. The issue with the Bible is you've got all these people who are professing Christians. They don't even know what they're talking about. They haven't read any of it, and like it doesn't mean anything to them. When you talk about it, you point out these sort of little ambiguities or ironies that are in the text, and they go, oh yeah, I don't know, I'll ask my priest about that. But if you go and ask your priest about that, 9 times out of 10 they're going to go, okay, well, I'm going to go ask my priest, because the priests have their priest, and it'll go all the way up, and then they're just going to point you to some sort of dogma that they've established to sort of rectify all of these contradictions. That's like generally the case. Like, you have all these pretty common misconceptions, like people who think that Jesus claimed to be God himself, which literally never happens in the New Testament, but became a necessary addition in order to hold together the sort of pagan metaphysics that was dominating the Roman Empire when they were creating the Church of Constantine. So you have all these people, right, where they're like, oh yeah, this is just like Mithra, and then you can just translate the sort of metaphysics that was being used to defend the Roman imperial cult, and you just put that on top of Christianity, and you go, okay, it's all the same thing, slapdash, put it all together. And that's pretty much what happens. So you got all these people who are pagans, they don't even know it. Ironically, in history, as soon as you have commoners, normal people can start reading the Bible for themselves. They go, wait a minute, that's not what it says. It says something completely different. This is ridiculous. And then they look at the church, they go, oh my God, this is the Antichrist. And that's history for you, folks. Same thing happens with Marxism, right? Where this is like the guy was getting mad because I made this analogy, but it's true of Marxism too, because you have Marx in the original and you can like read Marx. And then you go, okay, well, I've read Marx. And it's like, okay, now look at the Marxists. And I was like, what are these fucking Marxists doing? Have they even read Marx? They're just like completely off base here. And you try to tell them, and you go, no, 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 this is what Marx says. And then they call you a revisionist, you know? That's what they do every single time someone comes along and they're like, wait, you guys have been getting this wrong. Like, you guys didn't get it. They go, no, this is the tradition. Look, we've been doing this for a long time. And who are you? And how have you organized? And are you part of the movement? What are you? Have you taken roll call at the DSA meeting or whatever fucking club they have? It's always like that. People who think in these institutional forms are generally the same. That leads me to the other argument I was having with the right Hegelian, who was saying that in heaven there must be a hierarchy. There must be. That's what real equality is. Hierarchy. He says. I don't know. You can tell everything by people's vision of what the end of history is, or really what paradise is, what all of this is leading to, the utopia of man. What is it? How does it work? That's the question of like the New Jerusalem. What is heaven like? Do you have a job in heaven? Do you work in heaven? They might say that you do. Generally, a lot of the sort of institutional versions of Christianity premise an afterlife, which is actually the same as the Elysian fields of the Hellenic pagans or of the Nordic Valhalla, etc. But Christianity is not like any of these things because it's not pagan. And that's why you get all these perennialists where they go, actually, everything is paganism, and every single religion is actually the same, and they're all one, and they're all about the same thing. So Odin is kind of just like Jesus, etc., etc., and they do it that way. But it's all about bringing back in their pagan metaphysics. The pagan metaphysics is one that essentially denies freedom. The pagan world, there is no freedom. Everyone is a slave. Even Achilles is a slave to the gods and the fates, and even the gods themselves are slaves to the fates. Hey, hey, hey. Yeah, and the pagan gods are not free. That's one of the most interesting things about them. Only the concept of the monotheistic Christian God is a God that is actually free and has absolute freedom. The Greeks and the Romans did not conceive of a God that was absolutely free. They couldn't understand the cosmos or justify nature, the order of things, if there was a God that was absolutely free. To them, it was endless. It was chaos, strife. Strife was the nature of reality. There is no freedom. There is just strife and hierarchy, etc. That's paganism. It's also like, pretty normative. Most people are pagans. It's kind of like that's why Christianity and the Abrahamic faiths are so distinct and so revolutionary, is because they premise a God which is actually entirely free. That the creation of the world was a completely free act, that God acts freely. And if God acts freely and we're in the image of God, then we don't approach God in our subjection or our slavery or our miseration on what we give up, but in our freedom. So as we produce a more free society, we are truly honoring our God who wants us to be free and not to be slaves to anything. What's even the name? Oh, hey, baby. What do you think about that, baby? Does this sound good to you? Well, I think about all these things like there's a sense like this guy who was just arguing with. He was basing everything off of John 10, which is where Jesus says, "I and my Father are one." But what he's really saying is that that's not just true of him, but it's true of everyone. Because as the passage goes on, he says, "Is it not written that ye are gods?" So he's saying that like, how can it be heresy for him to say that if the scripture says that we are all gods, we're all the sons of God, and that if we align our wills perfectly with the will of God, which is the will of absolute freedom, or towards absolute freedom, then we could become the sons of God and the word of God as active in the world. And that was the whole point Jesus was trying to make, was to get people to align themselves with the concept of absolute freedom and to enact it. Yeah, that's right. And you see that with a baby. The baby does not have absolute freedom. I'm trying to teach her every day how to be free. I'm like, yeah, you can't even walk yet, but you're going to be able to walk, and you're going to be able to talk, and you're going to be able to do all these things, be able to take care of yourself and take care of other people. That's the whole point of being alive is building freedom, absolute freedom. Subjective freedom really comes down from absolute freedom because you're not truly free if you're in a society in which not everyone else is unfree. You want to build a world in which everyone's free. That's the goal. Free as they were in the garden, which is sort of like the primitive communism of the Christian metaphysics, is the Garden of Eden. Which and it's sort of like in Marxism, you have all these like degrowth Marxists who are like, well, real freedom is being a hunter gatherer before the dawn of civilization. So what we should really do is like Ted Kaczynski style, eliminate all of technological progress so that we can go back to the Edenic state of primitive communism. But that's not actually the point. The point, as Marx says, you wouldn't want to live in primitive communism because it's fucking life is brutish, nasty, and short, as others had put it. That's why all of this is sort of necessary. All of the fall of man, all of these things are sort of necessary in order to build the city of God in the New Jerusalem, which is a kind of more perfect form of the Garden of Eden. That's the beauty of the revelation of Christianity, is that it provides a justification for every single thing that happens, that everything in human history is leading to a rational end, and that end being freedom. It's beautiful. I try to preach it all the time. As I titled this, the gospel is free time and nothing else. We want a society of endless free time for everyone. Everyone to freely enjoy their free time, to freely worship their own freedom and their collective freedom. That's the beauty of it all. That's like the communists used to at least imagine, or at least, try to imagine a world where none had to work, where we'd have like basically total automation and people would distribute goods not based off of a value in the sense of exchange value, etc., but that there'd be such a superfluity, such a cornucopia of goods that work would be life's prime want. That it'd be, people would be like, oh man, I'm looking for something to do because I have so much free time and so many things. I don't even know what to do. That's what Marx said would be the dawn of the first truly human epoch, or time period, the aeon or whatever, be the first truly human time where we wouldn't have to be hard scrabble fighting nature for our own existence, but we'd have such a superfluity and would be so in accord with things like by means of automation, etc., that you'd be like, hey, what do you want to do today? You can do anything because the world is free. What do you want to do? And that would be the real question people had. That would be the real difficulty people would have, is what do you do with all of your free time? And it would be free time, not even not like we have free time today, where we do have quite a bit of free time. We fought hard for our weekend. We fought hard for our free time in the 20th century. But a lot of the time, this free time just becomes like another form of work, right? Where it's like you have all these gamers, and what they're really doing is they're providing the superfluous labor that gives the value to these platforms in the first place. Like if you have a video game that no one plays, it's actually not worth anything. So there's a kind of like symbiotic relationship there between the production of value and the actual value of the product. Like if you're selling a video game, an online experience for people to superfluously labor in their free time, there has to be other people doing it. No one wants to play a game where no one else is doing. So so you end up. It's a weird thing I think about all the time. But it's sort of like what if you like what if you had an MMO that was free to play? It's free to play, and there wasn't any pay to win mechanics. There's just that's sort of what communism is. So in some ways, we were like in this digital world trying to imagine what communism would be like, or trying to build this sort of utopia in the internet, in the virtual space. But as we've seen, that promise was always cursed by the fact that it's still tied into the world that we actually live in. You can't just build the New Jerusalem on VR chat. It doesn't work like that, because you're going to have to pay your bills. You're still being based off of this value form. You have to pay for your server space, etc. There's a lot of costs to running something like that in reality. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just rambling. I got This guy, regular guy, a normal guy, having a normal one. What can I do for you? Normie. You're on, Normie. You just gotta unmute yourself. I'll add a movie.
Oh,
The
sorry.
movie
Thank
post.
you.
What's up,
First
Normie?
time,
What can I do?
first time caller. Um,
Nice.
yeah, sometimes listening to you makes me feel like how my dad probably felt when he was listening to Rush Limbaugh. But
Hell yeah,
anyway,
that's what I was going
that,
for.
well, that's a compliment. But uh, um, yeah, one quick comment. I was re-listening to one of your spaces about this same subject, and it was just funny to me how many people would argue that no, people need things to do, you know. And I saw
Yeah,
this interview with Jeff Bezos, and he said that at this point in his life, his only job is to make like one big decision a day. And it's like, you know, that's what we want to do, you know. Like people think that people need shit to do. It's like my greatest memories are being a kid staring at the sky, you know. And I'll
yeah,
take the comments off air. So thank you.
yeah, yeah. That's I agree. I think that like, the real creativity comes from that sort of position where you go like, what do I do? And then you can like look around and you can be like, hey, you know what? Maybe like I'm imagining, of course, we have some things that we can't really take for granted right now. But like let's say you got your little plot. You got your little plot in your house, you go own some property, etc. You're not like underwater on debt or whatever. You can just kind of look at it and go, how can I make this better? Oh, I'll just clean this up, I love nothing more than power washing. Like I would probably spend a lot of time power washing because I don't know, like taking care of things like that. Like you get a lot of satisfaction from cultivating your own garden, and that's I feel like people don't have like the freedom in the sense they don't have the free time or to be able to use their labor power on those sorts of pursuits because it's all being sold into the market. So it's like you're tired from working all the time. You're going to be like, oh, I don't really. Yeah, I could probably fix this up, but I won't, and it like leads to like a continued ugliness in the world, right? Where it's like if we'd have such clean streets if no one had anything to do, because you'd be like, oh, I'll just go around and collect some trash, I guess. Like, what else are you gonna do? Like, the people do that. I see old men doing that all the time. Like, it's even like that's like a problem with like retirement, et cetera. Is that you have these people they retire and they're like, okay, now I have all the free time that I was storing up for my whole life, and then they go, what do I do with it? I don't know. And oftentimes they're like too old to really appreciate it. That's like our paradise is like you work and you slave at a job you hate all the time as like an accountant or some shit in an office that you grow to hate and you just get pushed around. But you get your money and you got your 401k, and when you retire, you're gonna just go down to Boca Raton and you're just gonna drink Mai Tais.
Yeah, I guess I will talk again if that's I
Yeah,
had a
what's up?
like I work 50 hours in a week in a fabrication shop, and like it's for like my free time on the weekends is just spent a lot just trying to get to work on the stuff that I want to work
Yeah,
on, for my own pleasure, because like all work is not the same. Work that I have to do in order to live and survive is not the same that work that
yeah.
same as work that I take pleasure
Yeah,
in.
this is what Marx
And it's
describes as
actually
like
like,
alienated labor.
yeah.
Like the alienated labor is the one that you like have to do by like you're like compelled to do it just in order to survive. But it's like labor is like beautiful, and when it's not compelled in that way, like unalienated labor. Like I'm doing unalienated labor right now, right? Like I don't have to do this. I just want to do it.
Yeah, and one thing that I wish I could do in my life is do more things for other people.
Yeah,
And people are like, oh, if we didn't have all this work, then people wouldn't be taken care of. No, we'd have more time to take care of each other.
exactly.
It's more blessed to give than to receive. Most people know this. Most people wish they could give back. I mean, that's why people are so fucked up, because they can't really like give anything to society of value. It's just like trying to survive all the time anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. They always show like all the statistics or whatever on like charitable giving or like volunteering or whatever. That basically like people, the more money you have, like the less likely it is that you're spending your time like volunteering or like giving shit to charities as like a proportion of the amount of free time you actually have. So it's like really, it's like we wanted more people to take care of each other. The people who would be best at doing that are the people who have the least amount of time to do it right now. So it's like like we'd see such a radical shift in all of society if we, we followed like Jehu's line here. We limited the work week to like 18 hours a week or something. You'd have all of these people suddenly with so much more free time if they were getting compensated to the same degree that they could like replicate their means of existence only working 18 hours a week. They'd have so much more time. They could educate themselves. They could volunteer at various things, become a part of like neighborhood societies. They could clean up their own area. They could, cultivate their gardens. Like it would be like a radical transformation of everything for the better. That's like why it's like the central issue and why I really like Jehu like sticking to that as the key issue because I agree 100% that the problem is that people don't have enough free time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not well read in theory or anything, so I don't understand all the arguments, but, kind of following his reasoning, I get it. I get his point, of how the government is it's basically just the enforcer of capitalism. People are like, no, no, we need to take down capitalism. It's like, well, if we just, defunded the government, I mean, that would be taking down capitalism. That
Yeah.
would be it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's
yeah,
like also it's like what fucking good is the government doing? There's so like think about it like all these man hours and like the civil service and like all these bureaucrats and it's like what are they producing? Well, they don't actually produce anything. They don't make anything. It's all superfluous labor. And like in a real democracy in a real republic, it's like you could do that. Like, if you had free time, you could govern your area better than these people are who are like past the civil service exams or whatever and they probably aren't even from there. They're just getting transplanted, trying to get positioned into some bureaucratic office where they're completely
well,
alienated
that's
from the
that's
conditions.
another thing. People argue with Jehu like, oh, well, we need government regulations, and it's, I've worked in construction for years, and I was an inspector for a while, and what I know is like all these regulations, they were not created by the government. They were created by the
Yeah,
trades themselves. They're created by the traditions of the craftsmen, and then they're adopted by the government. So it's like you don't even actually need the government to have real actual unions or have trade guilds or
yeah. It's sort
whatever.
of like the
You know,
idea like that you would need like the government to regulate films or something, and it's like, well, really, it's like people go see them, and then they like there's people like critics or like inspectors in this way or whatever who have like developed a reputation in like socially for their judgments on these things. So it's like if you just if you're a guy and you know someone who knows how to build houses and you're like, hey, can you come check this out? And they're like, yeah, this seems pretty good. Like this is how I do it. Or they could point out the problems to you. Like that's ultimately what a regulation is like you need like actual like the oversight, I guess, of experts, but that doesn't mean that people in the government are experts. That's the whole problem.
and also these regulations are based on basically experience of former things that went right or wrong,
Yeah,
and so the government actually holds back a lot of good regulations because they like uphold these rules that are basically obsolete, that like we've evolved past in our technologies and everything, like we're like beholden to this old bullshit that it's like you can't take this stuff out of law because so much bureaucracy is built around it and everything. So it's like it
yeah,
should be improving, and the government holds that back. It's like they're not really helping. you know
yeah,
so
absolutely, absolutely. I agree 100%. Anyway, is there anything else you want to throw at me, or I can move on to the next guy?
no, man, I'm just glad I caught this live, so have a great day.
Have a great day. Peace out, man. God bless. I got a movie. I don't know the full. I got just see movie prints. The movie prints. What can I do for you, movie prints?
Hello. Hey, Cameron. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I just want to say, first off, the baby background noise is fantastic.
Yeah, I
Let's
hear
keep
people like that. So
it. It is really soothing, shockingly. Like it. I wanted to talk about the Batman 2022,
oh
and
hell yeah,
goddamn, were you right about that movie, man.
yeah,
I
I
was
really
really
like it.
skeptical going into it, but it's like a Philip Marlowe-esque old noir movie. It really
Yeah,
captures that, and it was just so amazing.
yeah. It's the neon and the rain, like the rain, like rainy night with like the lights reflecting off of the puddles and the scum. Like that's like the real noir Batman. Like I always think of these like old panels from like Batman comics where it's just light reflecting in a puddle. Like to me is like very much like the Batman image. Or it's like the Batman
There
symbol
was a
on like the
couple
rain
things
cloud.
about the movie where I was like, all right, this could have been done better, but it was all little shit,
Yeah.
nitpick shit. But in all, it was really like very enjoyable. The one problem I had was like, obviously, I actually saw online that a lot of people said the same thing about the highway scene where like the trucks blow up and like hundreds of people must die in that. So that kind of like
Oh yeah.
sucks, but
I mean, that stuff's like always like the standard
but
like plot like in movies. Like I remember one of my cousins was like talking about how Batman doesn't make sense because like oh you can't kill someone but you can just beat the shit out of them. And it's like okay, all of this is happening in like the symbolic plane. Like it's not meant to be like taken like these are real casualties. It's all like in a video game. You know what I mean? It's a movie. So yeah, like obviously that like they could have. I guess would it have been a better movie if it you know, like devised ways to like so that there was no like wrecks and like no casualties or whatever. I don't know, maybe. It seems more like a kind of like Spider-Man type of thing to me, where it's like Spider-Man would like be like, oh, we can't allow any casualties. I don't know. I liked it because it's like more. I like the Batman and DC stuff in general because it's usually more like brutalistic in the sense of like they want to show like they're like they take it seriously enough for like there to be like actual stakes as opposed to the Marvel movies, where there's no stakes. No one dies, no one can die. There's an infinite multiverse, and blah blah blah. Nothing happens. But in Batman, it's like people die and they stay dead.
I thought the movie did a really good job at the end. And you've actually been talking about this, not specifically Batman related, but this idea of hope. And I feel like at the end, like even though Batman loses, like it's essentially like a wildfire. And at the end, like plants start rising, essentially,
Yeah,
where it's like there's a new day kind of rising up.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
basically all I wanted to talk about. I'm gonna head out. I gotta wash dishes.
Word,
I'm gonna still listen to you, but God bless you, man.
word, word, word.
Have a good
God
day.
bless, man. God bless. I was just gonna say on that. I mean, I'm interested to see what the Batman Part Two will be like, considering the ending of that one. It's like gonna have to go fully into showing like what this sort of because really the first this one is like Part One, so it's like the Batman, and the question is like, what is the Batman? Like, what's the point of Batman anymore? Like in the year 2022, why do we need Batman anymore? What does he represent? What's the point of making a Batman movie? So I feel like it was established in that one that like Batman represents not like in the Dark Knight series with the Nolan ones. Batman sort of represents a kind of like Roman Republican virtue in a sense of like he's willing to do evil shit in order for the good or to at least be perceived as evil. Like he's kind of like the kind of conservative oligarchical consciousness. Like he very much is like doing George W. Bush shit, neocon type shit in the Nolan movies. But in this one, it's more like Batman's like in the muck, like saving people actually, which never, literally, never happens in the Nolan trilogy. He's like too involved with counterterrorism to actually help people. And then it's sort of like the Reeves Batman is kind of like a post Nolan like criticism of the Nolan Batman in the sense that it's like okay, like the counterterrorism actually contributed to the production of more terrorism, so that clearly doesn't work. What does Batman do now? And it's like Batman has to be a mecha tank. He's got to go down and he's got to start fixing the crumbling infrastructure, like which is how it ends. I thought that was sick. Anyway, I got Jade. What can I do for you, Jade? Oh, you just got to unmute yourself.
Oh, my bad. I didn't even notice.
What's up?
I'm doing all right. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. You know, it's a little rainy day. I've got my baby strapped on me, just talking to y'all
I love
about
to hear
the
that.
same shit I always talk
I
about.
love to hear that, though. I don't know about you, but I've started to really like the rain. Rain is just something really beautiful that I think a lot of people they have like this negative association with rain. It's like a bad mood weather or whatever, but I don't know. I think there's something kind of
I've always liked the
joyful about
rain.
it to me.
I mean, you do get sick of it if you're like stuck around inside for a long enough time. But sometimes, like I remember being younger, I don't know, I find it very romantic. I have a lot of good memories of like staring out the school bus window in the rain and like listening to music
Exactly.
and feeling very feeling like I was in the credit sequence of my own life or
Exactly.
something. Um, but rainy days, good for reading. You know,
Perfect for
sit
reading.
around and you go, oh, I can't go out, gotta read. I like that in rainy days. I love
Me
thunderstorms.
too.
Thunderstorms
It's just such a
are
beautiful part
beautiful.
of creation. It's so stunning to see it.
Yeah, I really liked in Texas, the thunderstorms are like, because the sky is so big there. Because there's like almost like at least where I was in Dallas, there's like no real hills or anything, and you can see so far in like every direction that you could like see the thunderstorm like coming in and like it moves so fast. I really like that. Or like out in the big West, the big old West, the thunderstorms are like you can like see them as sort of like a like kaiju battle or something on the horizon. Like I'm trying to remember that painting where it has like the giant man that inspired Pacific Rim. But I always think of that as like thunderstorms. I was looking at a bunch of paintings of American painters doing landscapes of like big cloud formations and stuff like that. I really like those.
Oh, that's cool. You should do a little like a little highlight post about some of those. I'd love to see some.
Yeah, I should do more. I should highlight more stuff. I don't know when they added that feature, but I don't know. I gotta get to that. I'm still working on my archive, and I probably don't. I'll probably want to do that more on my archive than on the timeline, I
Oh,
guess.
sure. Okay, well, I had a kind of a little bit of an intricate political economy question for you, and I'm sure that this is probably something you've already
Okay,
addressed before.
I'll see if I can help.
Well, it's definitely right up your alley. This is I think that this is probably something that you've even articulated already. That I was wondering if you could kind of break it down in this environment. It might be a little bit easier for me to pick up on it. So I was recently reading. I just recently got started with Jehu. I really wasn't familiar with him until he recently joined back on Twitter. And so I was
Yeah,
reading kind of his introductory post where he talks about kind of the core of the concept of free time and like the reduction of profit generation as his kind of core philosophy. But what I also noticed as I was reading that is this doesn't really match up very well with, for example, Michael Hudson's analysis of the modern economy as one where profit is no longer the primary form. And now, of course, as you
yeah,
talk about, credit is the primary form. And so, what I was wondering is,
yeah.
could you talk just a little bit about how Jehu's analysis
So,
coordinates with that?
yeah. So what Hudson is like, what Jehu's talking about when he says profits, he's talking about profits like in general. And when Hudson's talking about profits, and like the type of, he's saying that it's not like profit in the way that an industrial capitalist makes profit, but now it's what he calls super profits, which he goes into in like super imperialism. And I think this is like even Lenin talks about this, but that's from this like type of credit formation, this like rentier ownership is actually think about this like right like what's more profitable to like flip a house or to rent it to like own it and rent it out for your entire life. Like you might make a decent chunk of change, like producing profit in the sense of flipping a house, like flipping an asset. And that's sort of like what is normatively understood to be a profit, where it's like I bought it at $1, I sold it for $2. But it's like, what if I bought it at $1 and I rent it out for 25 cents for 500 years? You know, like that's like a real, that's what's really more determinative now is like, that's why we have all of this like subscription economy stuff. Because the type of profits of like buy for one, sell for two, that has already collapsed quite a bit. Like the ability to make profits like that has collapsed quite a bit just with the efficiencies of markets. Like there's pretty much a standard market price for almost every single thing. And it's discovered pretty fast, especially these days. Like, you know, there's a standard market price for grade 10 holographic shadowless Charizard. You know, like that market price has been established. It's there's not a lot of room to be making a ton of profit on those, like flipping them or something. But if you, but so that's like the kind of distinction I think. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. Hudson is more on the line of like they disagree on other things. Like Jehu is like absolutely more radical than Michael Hudson because like Hudson is still kind of like a statist in the sense that he doesn't think that we can just abolish governance like right away, or like you know abolish all of these things. He's more interested in using like the type of policies that they should be implementing. That's why, but like he also has basically no advice for anyone in the West or under the Anglo-American dispensation here, because he doesn't see there being any possibility of revolutionary or reform in our conditions, because we don't even have like we don't even have like access to like the power there. Like it's all being like, you know, we don't get to vote on who sets the rates at the Fed, et cetera. These sorts of things. These policies are like beyond our democratic accounting. So that's why he spends so much time in China, because it's like really he's trying to help them with their like real estate issues. Like people are constantly talking about the Chinese real estate issues, et cetera, as like an example of their weakness or something. And that's kind of what he's put more of his focus on. Jehu, for instance, in that same thing would be like, well, the Chinese should stop buying American Treasury bonds because that's what's actually funding like the military and stuff. Like if no one wanted to buy American debt, then the American state would fall apart. Like the whole reason we keep having these fake debt ceiling debates or whatever is because, well, it's like it's all premised on the notion that if we're issuing these things, they're going to be bought, and they are. So Jehu points that out as being like what the way in which like if China really wanted to make communist revolution, as he says, then they would stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds. But then there's like the kind of more pragmatic approach, the kind of more like I guess gradualist approach, or it's more just like the kind of pragmatism, I would just generally say, which doesn't see that like there's the popular will for this sort of move yet. And it's like, so what Jehu's doing is he's trying to build the popular will to implement some of these things, whereas Hudson is trying to work within the system as it already exists. Like Jehu hasn't worked for Chase Manhattan. You know what I mean? Like Jehu isn't being invited to speak to advise the like technocratic officers of the Communist Party and things like that. He's more of like a prophet, you know. He's like a prophet out in the wilderness, trying to spread this consciousness. And I definitely vibe with him on that. I just also I think generally, I try not to be one sided, and I think Jehu, if he's one sided anyway, it's like his lack of appreciation for like the virtues of the bureaucrat to a certain degree. Like someone like Michael Hudson's definitely a bureaucrat, but it's like, you know, he's done a lot of good work at the same time. So like Jehu has like articles describing Michael Hudson as a fascist, which I think is absurd. But he calls pretty much everyone who isn't calling for the immediate like destruction, disintegration of the state and like an immediate revolution a fascist. And I think you can make that argument. Like I think he's consistent, you know. But I think like rhetorically, it's definitely less compelling to the people that like are actually inhabiting positions of power, et cetera, or any influence in society right now.
Definitely. And you know, that actually leads me into my other question that I was thinking about just listening to that last speaker that you had on here. I'm still a little bit kind of uncertain about how the destruction of the state would necessarily destroy capital. Or am I misunderstanding that? Is that not even what's being said?
Well, it's like so what's really being said, right, is like what's the largest employer in the entire world, in all of world history? Do you know?
I'm not. I guess I would. I can't say I know exactly, but I'm guessing that
it's the Department of Defense.
The Department of Defense is the largest employer of all time in all history.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So then think about that. It's like, what does the Department of Defense produce?
Well, basically nothing, right?
Nothing at all.
Yes.
Right. So imagine all of that money that we put into the Department of Defense. It comes from somewhere.
Yes.
Right? So what if we just got rid of the Department of Defense? Where would all that money go?
I don't. Well, I guess it would have to. Well, if we trace it back, it's technically coming from taxpayers, right?
Kind of, but we have this deficit.
We have the deficit,
right? So it's not really coming from.
It's almost kind of just being fictionalized.
Yeah, it's pure fictitious value, like pure fictitious capital produced by fiat.
Right. Okay,
like,
so in that case, we abolish the Department of Defense, but
and the Federal Reserve,
then
and CIA,
we abolish all of these things. But I guess then we're assuming that in order to do that, people will be in a position of power such that they could actually make wiser financial decisions after the abolishment of those agencies.
Well, it's not a, it's basically like we give that money back to the
Right.
people. Like where that like so that's like really what the distinction would be. So it's like, do you trust the head of the Department of Defense with his like multi-bajillion-dollar budget, or do you trust millions of Americans with their now, like, let's say they each got like $100,000 out of that deal? Because I think if you look at the budget and then you compare it like per capita, like each person, you can see how much money ostensibly per person in America is being spent on the military. It's like, do you trust the military to spend that money or the people themselves? I would say I'd rather the people themselves have that money.
I agree. I
And it's like,
kind
how
of.
would they spend it? Like, how would they spend it? Like myriad ways. Most of it would be paying off debt, though, right?
Right.
Like in our actual position. So then it's like, so then you eliminate all these debts. Like let's say we like wipe the state, we use all that money to wipe the debts of the state, and then so that you know what I mean. Like it would literally transform the economy to such a degree that people would start being able to accumulate capital, but this would also be like a major problem. Like it would basically necessitate the building of communism if we did this, just because that's what people would do naturally if they were granted the sort of power and agency in their lives that they would have in like a normal democracy. Like let's say America, if you were alive in the 19th century when you could get land for
Mhm.
free and then you'd like get your land for free and you'd build your shit on it and you'd cultivate shit on it and then you'd come into corporation with the people around you and you have a town. You'd be like, hey, okay, we're going to do this. It would be like that's what communism is like it involves like the direct participation of people in their own governance.
Totally. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of like it's like a it's like it requires this type of like that's the irony of like Ron Paul types, right?
Hmm.
And I was like Jay who's talking to all these libertarians because it's like what they really need to be able to do that is they kind of need like dictatorial powers in order to like abolish like you need to become a tyrant in America to abolish the tyranny of the American government.
Exactly.
Like you need to have like the position you'd have to get into that position in the first place. Like who has the authority to like be like, yeah, we're gonna bring all the troops home. We're just gonna completely like eliminate our imperial presence across the world. We're not gonna fund
Oh
NATO.
yeah.
We're stepping out of this treaty. We're stepping out of that. It's like who has the authority to do that? It's like, well, you'd effectively need what would be recognized by all of these people as being like a communist dictator to do that. It's like if you gave Ron Paul the position to end the Fed, he would be Mao. Like that's the irony.
That's now. Do you think that there's that like the avenues that currently exist? Let's just say the electoral system is that kind of your thought of like okay, what am
No, I think it's completely
it's
compromised.
completely
I think
compromised.
I've talked to
Okay, so
Haas
how do
about
we actually
I've
do
talked to Haas
this?
about this. I'm about to tell you. So I've talked to Haas about this, and this happened a lot in the late Roman Republic, where the people who were the original proletarians, the proletari, who only could sell their labor, like this is even where the term comes from. Um, they would the plebes, right? They would often do the secession of the plebes. So they'd all do like basically a general strike where they'd refuse to work and then they'd organize their own government. They'd elect their own Senate and they'd say, yeah, like we trust our Senate that we've created. We're not going to listen to your Senate. So then eventually these tribunes of the plebes became like a part of the government of Rome, like because that was like because basically the plebeians weren't going to listen to just the Senate anymore. It had its own issues where it got corrupted. It's sort of like the labor movement in America, where they're like, yeah, fuck the state. We have like the AFL or whatever, the American Federation of Labor, or like Tammany Hall, like way back in the day. They'd be like, yeah, I don't care about the party system. I'm a Tammany guy. I like Boss Tweed. He gives me and my boys jobs, etc. So really, like, I think that you'd have to make your own electoral system, and you'd have to do that in like your own party. So it'd be like beyond a. This is what the libertarians are trying to do, right? They're trying to create their own like infrastructure to run their own elections. They have their own problems, like doctrinally, inside of themselves. That's more than can be said for any of the communist parties in America or any of the socialist parties. The libertarians, ironically, are better at organizing their own society, their own party than the communists are in America. So that's why I see there's a big move in the Libertarian Party right now to become like a real viable political party representing these interests. They're really trying to do it in a way that like in a way where they're not going to like just cuck for Republicans or Democrats, but like they actually want to run their own candidates in elections and like build the power of the Libertarian Party. It's so funny how the Libertarians are like the Bolsheviks, but that's how you got to do it. You can't like you're not going to take over an institution. We have to literally build our own institution. So it's like if the electoral process is fucked, which it is, then we have to make our own. We have to make our own electoral process. And once you make something like your own system, it requires legitimacy through a kind of like dialectical engagement with its own creation. So it's like the Libertarian Party is going to learn by experience like how to actually run this party and do their own elections and things like that. And then if they do that convincingly enough over enough time, then they're just going to take over the whole state, right? Like that's like how it works. Like you have to build the legitimacy. Like how do the Christians work, right? It was like the Christians didn't go out and just go take over Roman institutions or other things like that. They built their own institutions. They built their own institutions, and enough people were going to them, and like or like saw like, oh, I see what you guys are doing, and they would join up, and that's how you have to build a party. Is you gotta build it yourself. You gotta act like you have the authority to inherit the state that already exists by building it.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. And then I guess just a tangential question that I would have is, and I think I know the answer to this already, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. I, people don't necessarily need to have the same articulated understanding that, for example, you or Haas or Jehu or fill in the blank with other people who have kind of these very rigorous philosophical frameworks of how these things work. I mean, I don't think that it's fair to say that, a Ron Paul would, he doesn't really think on this exactly in the same way, right? But is what you would say that that's not really necessary because the core goal and the core concepts are actually equivalent. It's just that there's a little bit more like
Yeah,
analysis going
I think
on
it's like
one side.
it's like he's speaking a different language in a sense where, or it's like if you talk to these guys like libertarian types or whatever, they're actually still involved in like the same tradition in the sense of like Ron Paul derives his understanding of liberty, etc., from the same sort of background that people like Marx did, in the sense of like the Commonwealth men or like the just the general tradition of like of which produced the American Constitution in the first place. Like this is a really old tradition, and Ron Paul obviously ties this to the church more directly, specifically like the kind of Congregationalist churches, the types of like American Christianity, which I've tried to like distinguish from the Christianities that Marx and Engels are often criticizing, which are these kind of like state Christianities of the of European of Europe at the time, as opposed to like the American ones. The American ones, it was like that's like Ron Paul likes voluntary associations or whatever, right? So it's like that's what the church is. It's like this voluntary association, which does those things instead of the state. Like Ron Paul believes in the separation of church and state, and like that's really what Marx and Engels were trying to accomplish. Like ironically, people talk about like them being atheists, et cetera, and like the state atheism. And it's like, well, yeah, like they were admirers of the American Constitution,
Mm,
where we did that. So it's like we've had state atheism for a long time, and that's like the problem is like you have all these this sort of like European focused tradition, which is then trying to interrogate American conditions, but Americans don't have the same vocabulary as like the Europeans, and our political forms are completely different. We have a completely different like tradition fundamentally. Like we're like a very radical break with a lot of like European intellectual traditions. So there's this kind of problem of communication across those lines because it's like generally the right or like the libertarian right in America are much closer temperamentally to like the left, i.e., like the hardline communists in China, than they are, and vice versa, where the quote unquote right wing in China are the like liberal progressives. which would be the quote unquote left in America. So we have these kind of there are these like polarities that exist in a society, like the dialectics within them. And if you're not like looking at it kind of positionally, where it's like, what does Ron Paul mean by communist when he's like, we don't want to have communism or socialism? What he really means is the state, like basically holding up these institutions of society, like things like investment banks and hedge funds, and bailing them out perpetually at the taxpayer dime, right? So it's like Ron Paul would have allowed the banks to fail. Like that's his that's what he would have done. Like that's what he said he would have done.
Yep. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
I don't have any further questions for you, but keep
For
up the
sure.
good work, man. Thanks a lot.
Have a good one. I guess more on that. I do feel like it's like you have to shed the kind of the lexicon people use, or like the dialect, in order to get to like the concepts, and that's very difficult because people like to use the like jargon as a sort of shortcut, instead of going to like the conceptual level of things. So it's like Ron Paul is talking about liberty and liberty for all and people's ability to own their own things and have their own businesses, etc. He's really talking about like people having ownership of their own means of production. Like if you translate it into the quote unquote like Marxist jargon, it makes more sense to Marxists, and then you could translate the Marxist jargon into libertarian jargon, and it would make more sense to them. That's the whole point of like MAGA communism, where if you look at a lot of these like MAGA movement people, who are building their like perspective ideas for a third party or what they would want their platform to be, most of the time they're like, we want to, get to a point where we have free energy, and we're going to build new cities so everyone can own their own land, and we're going to eliminate a lot of the red tape around this so that we can unleash the productive force. And it's like literally like they're like making like a Leninist platform for like the 21st century, and it's just that they don't really know it. I mean, there's some people on the right who are closer to understanding this, and they're actually where they're like, hey, the left used to be the ones who were like Leninists, but now it's kind of like we're the Leninists. I think that's like what's his face. They also have their problems. I mean, like Steve Bannon, is that his name? Bannon. Bannon called himself a Leninist and things like that. Like, so I don't know. There's a that's like this type of realignment is really just that the quote unquote left here has long ago abandoned any type of like economic critique in favor of a post-structuralist subjective idealism, that like you could say that the basis of communism right now it would be like being able to assert that like men are men and women are women, like common sense type things. I think that if you really want to get it across in America, you call it like common sense government. Like that's literally the same thing as communism, is being like, yeah, what we want is common sense government, and we want a common sense economy. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can go read Common Sense by Thomas Paine. It's literally like one of the major inspirations for the communists all across the world. All right, I got this person. I don't think I've had on a Quaternal Hypo Joe. Whew, what can I do for you?
Hello?
Howdy.
Can you hear me?
What's up?
Ooh,
Yeah,
sorry
can
for
hear you.
interrupting you, man. I don't know if you were still in your diatribe, but
No, it's all right.
all right. Well,
No, I put you on. Well, I was wondering now.
so first of all, I just want to extend my condolences for your grandfather. I'm sorry to hear that, and
Oh, thanks.
and
I mean, it's kind of for the best. He was having a really rough one, so I was kind of more like, he was really on his way out. He was in a lot of pain, so I wasn't really so sad to hear the news. I was kind of relieved for his sake. But
yeah,
it is
that's what
sad.
you said, and I think all of us have had similar experiences, or will have in the future similar experiences regarding the death of a close one. But I'm glad to hear that at the very least that you're very much at peace with it from what I'm hearing. But anyways, this question that I have kind of slots in, I think, somewhat nicely to what you've been talking about, which is, I mean, I'll just ask right away, and then you can say what you think. Which is, what do you find about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running? Is that something you're excited about? Is it something you're a bit skeptical about?
It means absolutely nothing to me, honestly. I don't think he's that interesting, or like he's like, I don't know. I can agree with him on things where he's like criticizing like the pharmaceutical industrial complex and all this stuff. He says all this stuff, but I feel kind of like he's like a spoiler candidate to kind of make these things like kind of just draw people back into the Democratic Party. Number one, and number two, I don't think he has any shot at getting the nomination whatsoever.
Mm.
So it's kind of like another like. So I don't know. I just don't get very excited about elections. I don't even know if there's going to be an election in 2024. We might go full war mode. Who knows?
Yeah, that's what
Who
you
knows?
said.
Like things are looking pretty bad. Like if they bring Ukraine into NATO, like you like like I don't know if we'll be having elections. It might be like, you know what, we need to secure the integrity of our election in this trying time of absolutely totalizing Russian disinformation. That we're gonna like do no elections this time. We're just gonna do I don't know. I feel like people might even accept that at this state of things. Especially if it's like, oh, we're gonna really allow Donald Trump to run again. Like I don't know. I feel like people are like there's like at least a large consensus amongst the loyal Democrats who are primarily like professional types um, that they don't really like democracy. That's one of the ironies. Way back in the day when Compa and I were in that video, the whole irony I was trying to point out was that all these people like they were like love democracy except for when people don't elect what they want, and then they're like, oh, this is not democratic. So I don't know. I don't really have. I've watched what is his name, RFK Jr. Do interviews and speak on a couple of occasions. I think I watched him I've watched him talk to a couple of different people on different channels, and it's like, yeah, I agree with some of the stuff he says. I just don't think that he has any chance whatsoever. And I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm a little sussed out by him to some degree because he's like, like is really like a Kennedy, like is I don't know if you're like a New Englander, if you're a New Englander with like old roots. People don't like the Roosevelts or the Kennedys very much out here in the hinterlands of Massachusetts, and I know why. I don't know if I trust the Kennedys that much.
Sure, well, that makes sense. Well, there's two things to what you said that I'd like to respond to, um, which is the Robert F. Kennedy thing. I mean, in terms of him attracting people to the Democratic Party, I'm not really too sure of that. I mean, do you mean attracting Republican voters to the
Uh,
Democratic Party, or?
Disaffected Democrats,
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be doing too
disaffected
well with
Democrats.
them, though. He seems to be doing pretty well with Republicans, moderate Republicans who wouldn't want to vote for DeSantis and who
Yeah,
don't
well,
seem
they're kind of
content
like
with Trump.
disaffected
Yeah.
Democrats
Yeah, okay. That's
in the
fair.
same way.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of like the like blue, like those are like the Reagan Democrats. You know what I mean? Like they're kind of like the same type of person where it's like they're like a little bit below maybe the standard Democratic like intellectual class or whatever, and not like their pure like patronage votes or whatever. Uh, they're more um, they're more like looking for what they like. I don't know how to describe this class of people, but it's like people who are just like generally like it's like Joe Rogan type views.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like Joe Rogan was like a Democrat forever, and then he was like, this is a little bit too far for me with like the and being like disaffected with them. But it's like it's you would never go Republican side because Republicans like associated far too much with like a type of culture war stuff or like they still have like the baggage of fundamentalism and like the type of in the 20th century, like late 20th century, right, like those are the big bad guys was the were the Republicans. So I just see like any attempt to kind of buttress the Democratic Party from within it as being like ultimately bad. If he was really going for it, I feel like he'd have a better shot running as a Republican. Like, you know what I mean? Like the Republican Party is much more open at this point to people to like shake it up and like redefine what it is. But I just don't think the Democrats have even that opening.
Well, he still might run for the Republicans. I wouldn't put it beside him. I mean, judging from his character, he
Maybe.
seems to be very loosely alleged to the Democratic Party. But maybe you see that differently. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a big fan of either of the parties, but I do think the Republican Party is kind of weaker when it comes to party discipline, which in this
Mm.
case would be better if you wanted someone who is doing something different. Whereas the Democrats are like a machine, you know, they're like a really well-oiled machine. You can kind of appreciate that on an objective level, just like not even caring about what they're doing. But they have like a party discipline far beyond what the Republicans have. Like they really, I don't think you can shake up the Democrats from within the Democrats.
Yeah, I see. I mean, I fear the same thing. But I am, maybe naively crossing my fingers for it to happen, and maybe JFK Jr. could be the candidate to do that. But then again, that's
It might make something interesting. It might you know, I feel like it's like all steps in a process, but I don't think he's gonna it's sort of like Trump in the same way where
mm,
it's like, you know, um like he's a step in a process, but I don't see him he didn't really do too much to radically alter the trajectory of things. In some ways, I kind of wonder if it's like he's done more or less to change the status quo. Because in some ways, he was like the perfect figure for all of these like bureaucratic powers to line up against. And I sort of feel that way about like maybe they're going to do that with RFK too, where it's going to be like he really exists or will be up there as like a challenge candidate just so that he can be swatted down and like really, really build back the power of the Democrats to do that. Because it's like they did that to Bernie, right? And it's like it's a really good like demoralization tool if you have these people who are like, oh yeah, I'm like in this party, but I want to push it in this one direction or whatever. And then the person who's like the face of the establishment just like completely crushes them. It really destroys people's faith in the ability to do anything different. So it's like, let's say he does all this and he puts all of these talking points out there or whatever, and then he gets crushed. Then all the lesson that's going to be had in DC is like, yeah, don't talk about those things. No one wants to hear that shit. It might seem like it, but they actually don't. And what they want is more Joe Biden. So I don't know.
right. So more concretely, you would say politically, just let things run their course until they're bad enough for maybe a
Yeah,
semi-violent
I'm gonna do
upsurgence to.
nothing.
Yeah, I know you're do nothing.
I don't
I'm the
think it's.
same.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like I don't even know if it necessarily has to be like violent. I just think we're hitting um, a point where I don't know how the system holds without going to war. And it's like if we go to like if we really enter like a full like World War III scenario, which seems to be just like what the plan is.
Yeah.
Like if you read the fucking deep state documents, like you're reading like the DARPA shit and Rand Corp shit, it's like they're planning for war. So it's like I don't really see how you can elect your way out of like this kind of central plan, which is being done out of the executive office, but is done like way beyond the purview of any of the administrators. Like, you know, you can throw Trump in there and like throw a wrench in the machine, but then they just, you know, find a way to get it back on course. So I feel like things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And you know what's funny is I was reading Wired magazine the other day because my father-in-law has like magazines. He still subscribes to magazines, so I read magazines when I'm at his house.
Hmm.
And he had Wired magazine. They interviewed Pete Buttigieg, and Pete Buttigieg said that things are going to get worse before they get better. And he's in the government. He's like the fucking Department of Transportation, and he's like, yeah, you know, shit's blowing up and it's getting like I don't know. I feel like part of the plan here is for like to allow things to get bad enough so that when there's like okay well we're going to solve this crisis like we're going to wipe out the debts etc but we're going to be moving to like a central bank like digital currency the CBDCs etc so I feel like there's like a kind of purposeful attempt to like kind of engineer a crash right now in order to or a crisis in order to bring in the solution that they've already been implementing these sorts of I don't know that's how I sort of see things happening. I don't think America is going to radically change for the better in my own lifetime. I think it'll take at least 100 years.
Mm.
Like that's how bad we've fumbled the bag. I mean, it's like if you look at from like 70 to now, it's only 50 years. We haven't seen real wages rise at all in those 50 years. I don't see why the next 50 years would be a departure from that, if that makes sense. I see things like getting more austere in America, the wealth gap like widening even more. Um, I don't know. I don't see a way be out of that right now electorally.
Well, I mean, the United States is already incredibly austere. I don't know how it could get any more austere at this point. But
Oh, it definitely. I've watched it get worse and worse, and I can easily imagine how it gets worse from here.
Okay, well, you're an American. I'm not, to be frank, so I can't speak for
Yeah.
America's situation. But to add on to that, from a European
No, it's
perspective, from what
definitely
you're saying
gotten worse.
with the Pete Buttigieg interview on Wired, is that I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Dutch government got deposited maybe a couple of weeks ago, something like that. But Mark Rutte, the prime minister, said that the government would hold at least for a few more years, which is a weird comment to make because elections are supposed to occur next year, which kind of adds on to what you're saying, to where it seems that people are bracing for some type of full-scale war or some at least a form of hybrid war that would
Yeah.
involve NATO and the United States to a greater
No, I
extent.
think No, I think honestly, like they might put Ukraine into NATO and just be like, okay, because like Putin's obviously said that's like a red line, and they're just basically trying to like they're saying like Putin's bluffing and he's not like all talk no walk and he can't like that's basically the policy is that like yeah they're not going to do shit like we can just do whatever and they're not going to do shit and that's what we're telling the Europeans and it's making the Europeans like the Europeans haven't had a reason to be jingoistic about themselves in so long, right? And it's kind of like you can even think like maybe a lot of like the refugee shit was like a way of producing the foreground for this type of new like European like nationalist or like European federalist like jingoism. Like I've never seen more patriotism for fucking NATO
Mm.
in my entire life. Never seen it. It's like a completely alien thing. I don't remember anyone being like, I'm a proud EU patriot or whatever in the 2000s or the 90s or the 80s or anything like that. I don't know if you can find evidence of that, but there's like a type of like Anglo-American, European, like this type of like free world, the West chauvinism, which didn't exist before, and I think it's like made these people mad. I don't know, like mad as in insane. Like I think that
Mm.
it's very possible actually that there's like limited nuclear exchanges over the Ukraine and things like that. And I don't write that off at all. Like I think it's entirely possible. And I think like there's like a kind of popular will for like they'd be like, yeah, like what, like would that really make Joe Biden less popular if like every time we go to war, it makes the administration, and the state itself more popular. It seems to be the most effective way of maintaining the consent of the governed in the West right now is to rally against a particular enemy, and if that means blowing up Russia and going to war with China, I think they would do that just to maintain the state. like and that's also like where all our spending goes. That's like how we excuse our effectively our like central planning of the state is through these military organizations, which are like completely unaccountable. I don't know. The Europeans are kind of freaking me out on that front because it's like I don't know why y'all aren't like revolting more. Like because as an American, I can kind of understand why Americans don't care. Like if fucking nuclear exchange happens in Europe, we don't really give a shit,
Mm.
frankly. Like it's not really like it doesn't affect us. If anything, it would be good for us, like in a perverse way, in the same way that World War II was great for the American economy. That's what Americans are very pragmatic in a kind of brutalist way
Well,
because
not just for
Americans will
their
be like, yeah,
economy, right?
war is good for everyone.
Yeah, and
They'll be
it's
like, yeah,
it's
war is good for us because we're win and we're like number one and it's good for our economy and it's like jobs and Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, all of this. Like yeah, let's like and like well, Americans would have no problem if it's like oh we have to Germans have to offshore their manufacturing and send it over to America because fertilizer prices, et cetera, are way too high. Like it's all in America's interest. Like we're gutting Europe out of our own interest, and I think Americans in general, even if they don't know the specifics of that, they know that it's like ultimately in their interest that this is being done to some degree. Like the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline like creates a whole like market for natural gas coming out of America and they're like those are good jobs. And honestly those are pretty decent jobs. If you're like a petroleum engineer or something, you're making a pretty decent living in America and it's actual like productive labor to a degree. So I think that the incentives are like kind of aligned and are there for the production of one of these wars. And obviously, the state themselves, like the administ, like the think tanks, et cetera, they're all justifying this. Like that's
yeah,
all they exist to do right
sure.
now. So I don't know. I think that we'll probably have like some type of major military conflict in the next 5 years easily.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree, and I mean, I echo your point about Europeans. I mean, most Europeans I talk to, my fellow Europeans, seem to be well, quite blind to the idea that we're heading into a
I
full-scale
think
war.
you guys are what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is that you guys are just going to experience the austerity that Americans have experienced since like the 80s,
Oh, it's starting.
because I don't think it hit you guys yet.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
well,
starting.
what I'm saying is that like I think Europeans like have kind of gotten off easy with their like social democracies, etc. But it's like the it's like a poison pill now because it's like okay, I feel like you guys it's like you guys are gonna have all that shit dismantled, and you're gonna be facing like what Americans have been facing for years or if not decades at this point because you guys avoided that just basically because we had to compete with the Soviet Union
Yeah,
over governing as crypto colonies. So we had to give you better deal, like we had to give you
yeah.
a better quality of life than in the Soviet Union. Now we don't have to do that. So we're going to be like, okay, well, fuck you. We're going to suck it all back to like kind of try to heal our own wounds here, our own gangrenous wounds. We'll get a blood transfusion from you guys. But I don't know. Like I don't know how bad the opioid epidemic is in Europe, but I can imagine
No,
that'll probably get
it's
worse too, and
yeah.
a bunch of things like that.
Well, the opioid epidemic isn't really a big thing here now, but I mean, we have seen our social system
Yeah, it might be.
deteriorate over the last 10 years or so. I mean, significantly in terms of our hospital care, et cetera, which, as you know, has always been quite good anywhere in Europe. I mean, especially in Northern Europe, but I mean, even in countries like Italy, France, et cetera. I mean, like things were pretty good and are starting to get drastically worse year by year. Um,
Yeah, I think I think that's what's going to happen, and in like some way, it's like this more conglomeration of the West, as people keep calling it. Saying like the West, being like war with the West. This used to be pure like war against Islam stuff,
sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
back
Sam
in the
Harris shit.
2000s.
This was Sam Harris shit, right?
Yeah, and but now it's like it used to be George Bush would be like, well, we're protecting democracy in the Middle East, and people would be like, yeah, okay, what about the oil? But now, if they're like Joe Biden's like, we're protecting democracy in Europe, and it's like if you were like, yeah, but what about the oil? People would be like, that's Russian disinformation, and it's like a completely different tenor than it was when it was like the neoconservative neoliberals doing this, like Bill Clinton intervention in Kosovo, stuff like that, or whatever. There was far more pushback against that stuff, and these days I feel like it's like the left or whatever's left of whatever is called the left. They're really relishing an opportunity to be like as fascistic as possible and like jingoistic in their defense, like being like these people are bigots and they're like subhuman, etc. Like they've really gotten an outlet that's like socially acceptable because it can be like Russians are subhuman, like racist, or whatever. That's really like it's like they're liberated to do that. I feel like they're relishing the opportunity because it's not like in their minds they're punching down on poor brown Muslims or something. In their mind, this is like truly liberatory. Like they want to bring everyone into the European fold. It's like straight up Nazism. I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime until like the last couple of years, but it's kind of freaking me out. I'm not gonna lie. Like the rainbow flag is kind of this like internationalist like world federalist type of movement because it's not just in America, it's like across the West in general. And it's like a new type of identity, like this type of like open admiration of a kind of global empire is like now they're like, yeah, based. Like where it used to be like that's what we were trying to avoid. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I mean, when I see the Ukrainian flags hang up here, I mean, I tell my friends and the people I know that are around me at the time I see them, like, this is a clear fascist flag, fascist symbol, like the fascism has finally entered Europe again. And they look at me with these big, large eyes, like I'm some insane lunatic. But I mean, I truly
Yeah.
do feel you to that regard, where it's like, well, the
Well, it's the
Germans
same
didn't see it
here. I
coming
mean,
either. I mean, it's not like anyone knew that the Nazi flag would
yeah.
be the Nazi flag, right?
yeah, like they were all just like, yeah, or well, we got to fight the Russians. It's like the same fucking thing. Uh, like a civilization is at risk, so we got to defend civilization, which is always Western civilization, which is always the full repayment of debts. So we're gonna make Russia pay.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's spooky, man. It's spooky because, like, I remember, like, I don't know. I fully believed as like, oh, if there's a threat of fascism, it's on the right, and then it's like, no, I don't see that at all. I see the exact opposite now, and it's very alienating to talk about. I mean, I guess I live in like the most European part of America, New England, and like the Pacific Northwest are like
You do. Yeah.
vastly majority white areas, which mostly identify in opposition to what is like the rest of America, which is more diverse, number one, but also um, more impoverished than these areas. They're like this is like the knowledge corridor. It's all like pharmacy. I'm like surrounded by pharmaceutical industries. Like there's literally biotech park, like is just a hop, skip, and a jump
Are you
away from where I am right
serious?
now, which is like a new park. Yeah, it's
Biotech
called
Park?
Biotech Park. Yes.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and they're like building a bunch of those big condominiums because there's a bunch of like medical school and stuff like that here. It's all for and insurance corps and things like that. It's all for like the fire economy, and they're all like they're closer in a lot of ways. Like it's cheaper often to get a flight to Ireland from here than it is to fly to the other side of America. So like culturally, it's like and Ireland is just a Facebook campus, and it's like this is like a part of America that's like we should secede and join the EU. Like it's a weird part of, and it's like I don't know. I see that as being the general subjectivity of like the European upper middle class, I suppose too, the
It, it
professionals.
it so is. I mean, my mother went there in the 80s and she felt right at home. I mean, coming from the Netherlands to New England, she just felt like she was right at home. She felt like it was a type of continuation of her own culture in many
It's
ways.
pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, religiously as
Like
well.
anytime I go to that, yeah, Northwest Europe is like all like the same to me. Like I don't know, when I was in Ireland, I was like, I feel like I could have got off the train in New England somewhere. It's just connected. Same thing with the UK. It's like all like kind of the same culturally too. I mean, we all speak English too now, right? So
Which is endearing to some sense,
I
but I mean,
yeah.
undergirded by the
I mean, I can
facts.
talk to you, so that's nice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like there's this kind of post national identity is kind of like people forget that like it was like there was like the fascist international. Northrop Frye pointed out this irony in the 20th century where you had all these communist movements
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
ultimately became like national communisms,
Yeah.
which were like about putting together the nation. Then you had all these fascist movements, which became truly internationalist. So it's like the real international, like, and you can see the end of World War II. We take all the Nazis and we put them in these international organizations. You got like Douglas MacArthur having UN forces in Korea fighting the communists and shit like that. It's a wild history that I think is just like not reflected in media. Like we just act like the state that we've been in was produced in a completely different way than it actually was produced.
Well, it was produced
If
ex
you look at
nihilo
like
from
under the
like the
hood,
spirit of equality and fraternity, etc. When obviously there are historical roots to all these things, and there's historical influences that are still at play, which no one is willing to look into or.
well, it's all like monetary history. It's like
Yeah.
weird, obscure monetary history. Like, why does the euro exist?
Hmm.
Like, that's like the real, you know what I mean? Where it's like, it's all about like exchange rates and like things that are happening in Switzerland at the Bank of International Settlements. And it's like, that's not part of the curriculum. Like, you're not teaching kids like, and the reason why the EU exists is because of, of monetary policy. But it's like, that's really what it is. And so then it's like you have this class consciousness basically of the people who are kind of pragmatic in the sense where like they're like, yeah, I'm just operating in this sort of international market. Like nation states are kind of a thing of the past. we have international corporations, etc., and that's the reality of the world. And they're just like, well, I'm just adjusted to the reality of the world.
Hmm.
But then, like, anytime there's people who are like, yeah, but what about like the people? Like, what about like my neighbors and stuff? And they're like, oh, that's like a very reactionary, populist, right wing thing to think about. Is like, what about the people that I directly engage with every single day? Like, you're supposed to be
Yeah.
thinking about the entire international community, this completely like abstract subject or whatever.
How dare you love your neighbor? Your neighbor's hundreds of kilometers off. You know, you don't know your neighbor, so
And he's
we'll
probably a
tell you what
bigot.
your neighbor wants and needs.
Yeah, it's spooky. I don't know what advice I would give Europeans. I mean, mostly it would be like, stop listening to the American deep state. Like, oh my God, it's kind of infuriating. Like, because it's just like, I mean, Americans within America, like the most patriotic Americans within America, are like, fuck the deep state or whatever. And then it's like you see these like European quote unquote patriots, and all they want to do is like be with the in crowd at like Oxford and Cambridge and the Ivy League schools and like California upper crust, etc. Like they're all kind of convertible. Like you have like European royalty and nobles going to Los Angeles to party with like the celebrities. It's all like one thing. It's that's like what Epstein, I guess, was kind of is still like something people haven't really fully digested. Is that these it's not even like there's national intelligence agencies. We have the intelligence community. And when they talk about the intelligence community, they mean like Five Eyes. They mean these like international, like NATO produced uh intelligence agencies. It's not even like the CIA is like independent from or unique from like Mossad or like the Swedish intelligence agencies or your intelligence agencies. Like they all are doing the same thing. They're all in the same class. They might even be classmates at the same schools. Like.
Yeah, it's all coagulated, and they do go to the same classes. And I mean, that sounds pretty low tier conspiracy theorist, but yeah, that is true. It is the case. But then to another extent, I push back on that a little bit because I mean, what Macron has been doing over the last few years seems to be going in a different direction than Europe, taken as a whole, wants to go into, which is to say that he's been trying to get to be friendly with China, for instance. You know, he's visited Xi Jinping, and and he's been very critical
Yeah,
about the peace negotiations, and very adamant that there should be a peace resolution no matter what. And so,
yeah. I
while he
mean,
is a
he
bit
did
of a
describe
neoliberal
himself as
hawk,
a
I would say
Jupiterian.
that I mean, there is some pushback.
Yeah, I think that ironically, where you find a lot of the pushback against it is just kind of from like these liberal nationalists. This is true, especially in Latin America,
Yeah.
where it's like if you look at like El Salvador, they had this guy who's like a fucking like Bitcoin pirate, like free market type guy. But then the actual process of governance, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna institute martial law and like completely dismantle the cartels. And now I'm getting Chinese investment for for internal improvements and things like that. So it's like, ironically, these like national liberal figures. This is even true in like Ethiopia with like what's his name, Ahmed. Um, like they by being like, okay, I'm actually just trying to govern like my particular people right here and their best interests, like a liberal nationalist would or whatever. They end up running full force into these type of international liberal organizations, and then they end up like it's described as going to the right. Like, if you're like you're a skeptic or you're like, oh, I don't want to join these international things. But most of the time what it is like it's kind of like this, it's looking for independence, I guess, right? Like in the sense of being like Macron's looking for what little independence he can have from the EU. But I mean, I don't know, I just see all of these people kind of crumbling because it's like I don't know if anyone's really organized enough to oppose these types of international organizations because they have so much power and they have so much like they're so cryptic in the sense that they don't have to like they're not open to being studied. They're the people who study you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you could be like, oh, we're going to audit the intelligence community, but it's like, well, you would need the powers of the intelligence community to be able to like fully audit the intelligence community. Like they're the ones who are auditing us. So that's like the other spooky thing where it's like, let's say you start organizing effectively. It's like, well, then you become the internal threat, right? And then that's like there's going to be a lot of resources put into fucking with whatever you try to do to oppose that. You see that in America all the time,
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely you do.
where
But the interesting thing with Macron is that he's very dialectical in the sense that, you know, he has this, as you call it, the national liberal sense of let's gain as much economical independence as we possibly can. Let's try to make partners across the board so that we don't, you know, fall into the chasm of war. But at the same time, he's for federalizing Europe, right? So he's
yeah,
pulling the two strains at the same time, which is interesting. Uh, I agree with you. It's probably going to crumble regardless, uh, but still a very interesting, like kind of historical position to take. I feel.
yeah. I mean, he's definitely not the worst of them all, but I just don't think that he's going to be effective at altering the course of things.
No.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be a downer or anything, but I really think the chances of us avoiding like a large scale war of the likes of which the 20th century had is pretty unlikely for our century. Like it's kind of even more worrying when you have these people who are proclaiming the end of history. Like again, reading this Pete Buttigieg interview, he was like, "Yeah, we've seen the end of history." So it's kind of like they're like, "Well, it's time for us to go sicko mode." Like that's kind of like the way I read it where it's like Fukuyama's like that meme of Fukuyama holding a gun saying end history now or else where it's kind of like where it's like before this end of history notion of like the international liberalization of things it was like hey we're going to do this to avoid wars and things like this is like a way to have peace. Now it's like listen if you're not going to let us make peace on this way then we're going to make war. So
Yeah, they're going full kamikaze for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's what's spooky about it.
All right. Well, on that spooky note, I'm sure many other people want to talk to you, so I'm going to leave you be. But definitely interesting to talk with you, and thanks for your time as always, dude.
For sure, man. Have a good one.
You too,
Peace.
man. Peace.
All right, I'm gonna add. I've talked to Golot a bunch of times. I'm pretty sure, so I'm gonna add Michelangelo here. Howdy. Yeah. What's up?
Oh, what you're basically saying is free time and nothing else, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like
Freedom.
I don't
Yeah.
see I don't see how anyone else could have that like type of interpretation because that's basically like what the New Jerusalem is, right? It's like the
Yeah.
completion of
So
history.
we want to build the New Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yeah, because like even in the New Jerusalem, like everything will be complete. Like all the cardinal directions, like south, north, east, west, will be together, right? And there'll also be like the 12 gates of the tribes of
Yeah.
Israel.
Yeah.
And you're also saying how like there's no temples, right?
Yeah. The whole
Like
thing is the temple.
like we're basically the temple.
Yeah.
Like the God and the Lamb are the temple. They're
Yeah.
worshipped everywhere.
Yeah.
I just think
Yep.
that's pretty cool. You just have
Yeah. Me too.
infinite free time with God.
Yeah. Exactly. It's beautiful. I agree.
And that's like what all the heretics were trying to say, right? But then they all died, got burned at the stake.
Pretty much.
Like
So it goes.
what's that guy's name? Giordano Bruno? Is that his name?
Yeah, Bruno, Servetus, the Albigensians, the Valdensians, the Wat Tyler's rebellion. You could go on and on. It's happened over and over and over.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Where it's like that's the church which is martyred is the sense of like these people who are demanding to build the actual to actually govern Earth as it is in heaven. Right? These are the people who are crucified by the Catholics and like the institutional church. So in my view, it's just like okay, well that's the Antichrist then. That's the Antichrist that's drunk with the blood of the saints because you have all these movements which seem to clearly be rooted in Scripture that are demanding actual Christianity, and then they're killed for what? They're killed for these dogmatic points. What are these dogmatic points most of the time? They're like these like little trivial rhetorical positions that the inquisitors say that you have to take, and most of them spawn from Augustine.
So didn't like August like have beef with like what are they called, the Donatists? Like what was that about?
Yeah, the Donatists were the ones who were like freeing the slaves. Augustine said that slavery was good. So
Because they were like living on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, right?
yeah, like North Africa.
Oh yeah. And he used to live in Africa, I'm pretty sure, for
Yeah,
like
he
a
did.
while.
Yeah, and he was actually like a Manichaean. Like he was not a Christian until much later in his life, but he was mostly trained as a Manichaean, and then he converted to Christianity, and he converted to Christianity mostly to make arguments against these people who had been Christians for much longer than he had, which is kind of funny, I think. Or like like he was having arguments with Pelagius, and Pelagius was like, "I can read Greek and Hebrew, and you can't read either of those. You're reading the Latin translation of these."
Latin,
And
yeah.
yeah, it's funny.
Not the vernacular.
Yeah. So like it's really just like he was called in like it's sort of like you look at like the people who get institutional funding for things like what's that philosophy tube or there's one of those YouTube accounts that was like well, I'm a radical communist leftist or whatever, and then they start getting a lot of funding, and now they're like in Hollywood movies, and they were making things about how the French Revolution was just like rooted in resentment, and it was like identifying with Marie Antoinette or whatever. And it's sort of like the same thing you could see with Augustine, where it's like he's like identifying with Christianity, but then he gets all of this institutional funding and like and support from like the Roman oligarchs who are in the church and want to defend their liberties to extract debt repayments, and he's just providing them arguments. So they're like, hell yeah, like we're going to send you over to clean up these churches in North Africa, which are trying to cancel the debts. And he's like, okay, I'll call them heretics.
Yeah,
And he called them
it's almost
heretics, and
like
then they sent in the legions.
yeah, it's almost like he's using theology as a way to like defend the creditors, right? Like,
Pretty
that's
much,
kind of like
yeah.
his whole point.
Yeah.
Or kind of the same thing with Calvin.
Yeah, Calvin did it. The big problem with Calvin, right, is that he was saying that the Catholic Church had departed too much from Augustine in a lot of ways. So most of what he's saying, like in Institutes, etc., his writing is rooted in Augustine, and he was burning people at the stake too. The even more radical reformers, like Servetus. Like Servetus was like a Pelagian, and Calvin literally ordered him burned at the stake. When even the inquisitors at the time, the Catholics, hadn't even burnt him at the stake.
What was that other guy? Oh, like Servetus. I forget his name. I'm trying to find him.
There's a ton. Or it's like Luther with the Peasants' Rebellion.
Peasants' Revolt, yeah.
Yeah, Munzer.
What's his name? Let's see. There's Sebastian Castellio. He was another guy too, like Servetus.
Yep, a bunch of guys. There's like the Inquisition has been ongoing for quite a long time.
It's still here.
Augustine started the Inquisition. Yeah, I mean it still is. You got the Pope is hanging out with the Rockefellers, and the Inquisition continues.
Yeah, what's your because I don't really like Luther or Calvin that much.
Yeah, I'm not a huge
what's your
fan.
thoughts
I can
on
appreciate them, but
yeah, I do appreciate them. They're like men of their time, right? Especially Luther.
Yeah.
But what's your opinion on like Erasmus? Because I know like he was kind of like influenced with like the Renaissance, other type of reformers, the Renaissance humanists. I kind of like him.
I like Erasmus a lot. He wrote like really funny satires. I generally like satirists, like people in their own time who write satires. I think are like generally of the same spirit. Like the satirical spirit is something I've tried to trace, like Menippean satire, etc. Because I think it's like
or like Rabelais, or whatever his name is.
Yeah. I like Erasmus a lot. In Praise of Folly is really good. If you've read that one, that's one of my favorite Erasmus books.
I haven't read it yet, but I heard it's like one of the great sermons of all time, right? Because he's basically saying that we're all sinners at the end of the day.
Yeah, he's like
that's why he's using folly.
yeah, being a fool for Christ, like a holy fool. I always like the tradition of like the holy fool is like very big in Eastern Christianity too.
Wait a second.
Oh, I was saying the holy fool
Oh, okay.
is like a figure, like the person who's it's like that's like the whole point Erasmus is making and Praise of Folly that like um or Melville says man's insanity is heaven sent. So there's sort of like a blessedness to people who seem insane under this order, and I feel that way oftentimes when I see like these people who are like very much would be described as like mentally ill, etc. Like these sort of like raving homeless people, etc., or like street preachers and things like that. I think those people are generally more in the right than anyone who is against them.
See, I like homeless people. Sometimes I just, walk around or drive around and I just talk to them, and a lot of them are like really interesting. I don't know,
Yeah,
it's
a
like
lot
we
of
have
the
a
times
culture.
it's like they have a like a lot of the times they're like very like spiritual or like obsessed with these sorts of things, and that's
Yeah, yeah.
part of what drives their alienation from society. Is like imagine like you like really take this stuff seriously, and then you're sent in for like schizophrenic delusions, and they're like, listen, uh, I can't really tell you that God isn't real, but God isn't real, and you just need to like take your pills and go to work and get a job. And they're like, but I want to live in the kingdom of heaven. And they're like, okay, put this one in a put this one in a padded room.
Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah, they're
looks
not
like they're
treated
already
very
in it
well.
right now. Like they're in the kingdom of heaven. They have free time. They're in paradise, kind of.
They can be, but there's also there's it's we're not free until we're all free at the end of the day. Like Jesus was homeless, you could say, right? He lived on alms, but he also wasn't smoking crack. So
Yeah. But like I've been getting into like Hegel recently, and he's like talks about like freedom. Does that
yeah,
have something to do with Christianity? Because I know he adopts
for sure.
Christian eschatology for like his history thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, Hegel was very much a Christian. He was very devout Christian.
He's
Um,
Lutheran, right? Because he's German, I
yeah, he was.
guess.
Yeah. So it obviously informs a lot of what he's doing, but he's also like on more of the like avant garde of that, in the sense that there was the major trend was to use Enlightenment reason to defend the institutes of like Christianity. So, but that ultimately leads to a sort of like deism in the sense of like rational theology, etc. And he was more of the like historicist school. So he's hey there. Oh, someone just woke up. Hey. Yeah, he's closer to the historicist school, so he's looking at like the like he calls Christianity the absolute religion, where it's like the
Yeah, he called it the
perfection. Like
revealed religion, right? Because like for
yeah,
Hegel, like God doesn't just exist outside space and time. It's like God is within us. That's kind of what he's
yeah,
saying, or that's how I see it, at
exactly.
least.
Yeah, no, that is what he's saying. Yeah, Hegel's great. I love reading some Hegel.
Yeah, it's like really hard sometimes to like read what he's saying because it's like I don't know. I don't think like he's that organized
Well, I mean,
in his
like
books. But
people have like yeah, I mean he was writing at his time, but like there's like he gets more organized as it goes on. But I feel like I like the disorganized parts more than the fully organized stuff. Like there's like the science of logic and there's like encyclopedia at the end. Like that's what he's working on. But I'm like I like the phenomenology,
yeah,
and
I just started reading that,
yeah
and then I know obviously after that I have to read the Science of Logic, right? Because the phenomenology
yeah
is just like a how do you call
it's
it?
like a
Like a
preamble.
practice. Yeah,
Yeah,
preamble.
yeah. It's all worth reading. I mean, his lectures on aesthetics are really good. Hegel in general is just like really solid. I think I like people have called him the last philosopher. And I think that's true. I feel like he like finished philosophy, where
Yeah,
it's like
because
now
like
he
you
can do other
finish.
things.
Yeah, he finished the Platonic idea by historicizing it, right? That was like
Yeah,
his goal
exactly. Yeah.
for like love of wisdom to actual wisdom. That's what he says in the preface.
Yes. So no, not philosophy, but wisdom. Like this is what Kajev describes as the difference between like the philosopher and the sage, where it's like the sage actually has wisdom and isn't looking for it, but he's like, I can answer all the questions. My discourse is like a complete circle, and that's the Hegelian innovation.
Wasn't he like also inspired by like poets? I know he didn't really like sentimentality. He wanted everything
Yeah,
to be rational, right?
yeah, to rational in the way that he means it, which isn't in the same way. Like rational, like he would say Jesus Christ is the most rational man, you know, but others would describe him as extremely irrational and sentimental, you know.
I have one last question, I guess.
For sure.
What's your thought on the poet Meister Eckhart? I haven't read him yet, but I heard he's like really good.
I think it's good. Yeah, it's like definitely like closer to like quietus, like fideism, like a lot of the Christian mysticism in that like Bohème and Eckhart and stuff. I really like it as like poetry. It's very very good, worth reading. It's like reading any kind of. I like the transcendental or metaphysical poets like that quite a
Oh,
bit.
like John Donne, like the Elizabethan
Yeah,
poets, right?
yeah,
Metaphysical.
yeah, yeah. I see a lot in common across those.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they're kind of hey there. They're kind of you know they're writing poems to like they're kind of writing them for themselves, but they're kind of like riddles for you. You know, a lot of the concepts are difficult. Like when you understand, when you can finally grasp like what one of those like Mr. Eckhart's even talking about, it's very pleasant to to get that revelation, I suppose. It's
Hmm.
at least reading a lot of that stuff has helped me because most of it's inspired by a lot of the like parables or paradoxes or mysteries, etc., that are in the scriptures themselves. So reading a lot of that type of contemplative poetry, I think, opens up your imagination to being able to read the scripture in like a more inspired way.
Yeah, it's like kind of dialectical, kind of
Yeah, yeah,
in that
exactly,
sense. Because
exactly.
like when I read the Bible, like I don't like read it literally, you know? Like I go back and forth sometimes, and like
Oh yeah,
every time I read like a new passage, like I see it in a new way, a different way.
yeah, same man. I'm rereading and rereading and rereading it all the time. Like it's hard. I often like find it difficult to read other things. I mean, I do read other things, but I'm almost always like I'm having the most fun when I'm engaging with the Bible and like being like, oh, this is like this part, and like just overlaying different parts on top of each other. It's so like self-referential or like hyperlinked to itself that it's like the most avant-garde novel you could possibly imagine, you know? like like
Yeah, it's great. It's pretty
it's
great.
great.
Everyone should read it,
I agree,
even
man.
if they're not Christian. But
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. That's what one funny thing is even when I was a little kid and I was there I remember there we had to do like a debate in like junior high or elementary school or something about whether or not the Bible should be taught in school. And I was known as a very ardent atheist in my youth. And
oh,
I
that's
said that
ironic.
I thought that it should be no, but I said I thought that it should be taught in schools even then because I
Oh,
was like, yeah, it's like an extremely important work of literature. Like you can't really understand anything else without it. And I think that it's actually should be a part of like the school curriculum, like that everyone should have to read this, whether or not they agree with it or not. I was like, you can add the Quran to that too, or other things like that. But I think everyone should have to read these things. And I remember the teacher being like very like confused by my position because they were like, but you're like an atheist because we'd have other debates about things like that. And I'm like, yeah, but you know, this is beyond questions like that. This is about art. but
yeah, it's
it's
poetry.
yeah, yeah, and it's
It's a
also
book of
like
poetry.
the thing is though is that the reason why they try to keep it out of curriculum and stuff is because it's too powerful. If you actually start reading it, you starts meaning too much to you, and that's dangerous. So you know, it's better to not. That's why all the churches didn't have people read it either. They replace it with like spectacles and the sacraments of like the sort of performances they put on the different masses. They're like, yeah, you don't need to read the book. You can just watch us do like a little play about it.
Yeah, just talk to the priest, guys. Just talk
Yeah,
to the
just talk
priest.
to the
All
priest.
right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I got a baby waking up here, but it's been nice talking to y'all and having a space today. God bless. And remember, the gospel is free time and nothing else. Good night.